Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to learn how to analyze the authorized text by tracking predictions and identifying targeted struggles. Whenever we read a story, our brains are naturally trying to figure out what happens next. But strong readers, they don't just guess randomly. They use specific evidence from the text to make really informed predictions, and they actually adjust those predictions as new information is revealed.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. First, the plot structure timeline. Then we'll meet Avery and Jordan. Third, confirm or modify predictions. Fourth, internal versus external conflict. Fifth, the empty box resolution. And finally, number 6, recap and text transfer.
So let's start with Section 1, the plot structure timeline, the blueprint of a story.
To begin, we absolutely need a framework to map out our story's progression. Think of this as the architectural blueprint that authors rely on to build suspense, develop characters, and eventually bring a whole narrative to a close. These are the 5 plot stages of the plot structure timeline, which authors use to carefully structure a story from start to finish. We start off with the exposition, where the setting and characters are introduced. Then, the rising action introduces complications and starts building up tension. All of this peaks at the climax. That's the highest point of tension or the big turning point of the story. Following that, we have the falling action, where the immediate fallout of the climax is dealt with, leading finally to the resolution, where the central problem is addressed.
Moving on to Section 2, meet Avery and Jordan, a practice narrative.
Let's see this plot structure timeline in action by introducing our practice characters for today's explainer, Avery and Jordan. We're going to build a micro-narrative with them, just to practice our analytical skills before you apply them to the authorized text. Let's start right at the beginning of our timeline. During the exposition, Avery and Jordan find a mysterious locked box, and almost immediately, they clash over how to handle it. Avery wants to just smash the lock with a rock, while Jordan insists they need to carefully pick it. Because they're already fighting in the very first stage of the story, this textual evidence leads us to predict they're going to spend the rest of the narrative arguing and working against each other.
All right, Section 3, confirm or modify predictions, testing new evidence.
As the plot moves forward and the rising action unfolds, we gather new textual evidence. And as active readers, whenever new evidence appears, we have to stop and ask ourselves a really important question. Do we confirm our prediction, or do we modify it? If the new textual evidence directly supports your initial guess, you confirm your prediction. For example, if Avery actually grabbed a rock and Jordan tried to wrestle it away, well, that evidence perfectly aligns with our guess that they'll keep fighting. But if new textual evidence forces a shift in your guess, you absolutely must modify your prediction to match the new direction of the narrative.
Let's pause for our first check here. We're in the rising action, and Avery and Jordan suddenly discover an engraved 2-person riddle on the lock of the box. So think about this for a moment. Which new detail is strongest here, and does it confirm or modify the prediction that Avery and Jordan will just continue to argue?
The answer is that this strongest new detail, the engraved 2-person riddle, modifies our prediction. Why? Well, because a 2-person riddle inherently requires cooperation. They physically cannot open the box by arguing or acting alone. The textual evidence has changed, so our prediction has to shift to match it. Now for Section 4. Internal versus external conflict. When analyzing their disagreement, we have to remember that conflict isn't just some random event. It's a targeted struggle that drives the entire plot structure timeline forward. This struggle generally falls into one of 2 categories. Internal conflict is a struggle occurring within a character's own mind, like, say, if Avery was secretly terrified of what might be inside the box but wanted to act brave. External conflict, on the other hand, is a targeted struggle against an outside force or person. Our practice characters arguing over how to open the box, that's a textbook example of external conflict.
That brings us to Section 5, the empty box resolution, the final payoff.
Let's move over to the climax and falling action to see how all of this builds toward the end of our plot structure timeline. We've tracked their conflict, we've modified our predictions based on the riddle, and now it's time for the payoff. At the climax of our practice story, Avery and Jordan successfully cooperate. They pool their knowledge, solve the complex 2-person riddle, and the lock finally clicks open. But in the falling action, they lift the heavy lid, only to discover that instead of gold or magical artifacts, the box is completely empty. This brings us right to our second check, which requires us to look at the mechanics of the resolution. Based on everything we've discussed so far, how do you classify the conflict over opening the box, and how exactly does the empty box resolution change the central problem they faced?
Okay, here is the breakdown. First, the initial clash between Avery and Jordan is an external conflict. Second, the immediate problem, which was how to open the locked box, is undeniably solved. The lock is gone. However, the characters now face a completely new reality without a reward. And that's such a crucial point to remember. A resolution simply addresses the central problem, but it definitely doesn't guarantee a happy ending or a shiny prize.
Finally, Section 6. Recap and text transfer applying the skills. To recap in 3 sentences, we used the 5 plot stages to track Avery and Jordan's external conflict over a locked box. We modified our prediction when the 2-person riddle required their cooperation. Finally, we saw that their empty box resolution solved the immediate problem but presented a new reality without a reward. Now it is your turn to apply these exact steps to the authorized text with this final transfer question. Think carefully about the textual evidence you uncover as you read and ask yourself, using your authorized copy of the text, what is the strongest new detail in the rising action, and does it confirm or modify your initial prediction about the central conflict? Keep that question front of mind as you read, and remember to track those plot stages and targeted struggles closely. Happy reading, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.